So hello everyone, my name's Karina Urquhart and I'm the Executive Director at BIC and your host for this BIC Brunch today, which is all about AltText, and particularly in light of the EU Accessibility Act, which I'm sure most of you will have heard of. So just before we get started, just some housekeeping. Get the slide, there we go. Questions will be answered after or will be taken after all the presentations have been given. So please do, you should have a little question box, your question drop down on your toolkit somewhere on your screen there. So please do use that to put questions in. You don't have to wait for the Q&A session. You can, as they come to mind, feel free to put them in. You won't be identified. I won't call out any names or anything like that, so just feel free to ask away. The event is being recorded for us, for BIC to use in our marketing and to let people who aren't able to attend this session today to still enjoy the event later on. And again, as I've already said, you won't be identified in the recording at all. Please note that while this session will explore how best to create AltText, it should not be considered in any way to be legal advice by any individual or any organisation that is attending the event today or watching it on the video later on. And we won't be able to address any business specific issues or questions. Finally, a reminder that BIC is a neutral membership organisation, and as such, I politely ask that all attendees and all speakers avoid any conversations or questions that might be considered commercially sensitive or anti-competitive. So thank you in advance for that. And we'll be sharing the slides that you'll be seeing later on today. We'll be sharing those slides later with you. So if you don't get a chance to make a note of all the links that you'll be seeing, don't panic. You'll get those later on. So that's the housekeeping over with. Just a quick look at the agenda so you can see the shape of today's session. So we've got 3 speakers lined up for you today. So Huw Alexander, who is the Managing Director at textBOX, Lindsay Sheriff, who is Senior Books Data Specialist at Taylor & Francis Group, and Colin Shales, Sight Loss Advisor, Digital Skills, UK Sight Loss Advice Service at the Royal National Institute of Blind People. I should just say about Colin that he's very kindly standing in at very short notice, less than 24 hours in fact, for his colleague Madeleine Bloom, also Sight Loss Advisor at the RNIB, as unfortunately she's unwell and not able to attend today. So we wish her a speedy recovery and say a massive thank you to Colin for standing in very short
You're more than
notice.
welcome, thank you.
As I've already mentioned, we've got a Q&A session later on, so that will be after all the presentations have happened. And there will also be a quick poll during the Q&A session for you to take part in, and it's going to be all about your AltText readiness. It's very quick, just a quick, click which box you think applies to you. It will be anonymous, and we'll only be sharing the aggregated statistics, so we won't be able to see names or anything like that, so don't worry. So that's the agenda. So before we get going, just a little bit about BIC for those of you who may not have heard of us yet. So we're a UK-based members organisation at the heart of the book industry, creating standards, best practices and resources. We help organisations become more efficient, save money, become less wasteful and hopefully ultimately greener. We hold a unique position of trust, facilitating UK and industry-wide collaboration to reach agreement on dependable standards and best practices in the supply chain. So how do we do that? We do that in a variety of ways, including running 5 strategic committees, focusing on different areas of the supply chain, so looking at libraries, metadata, physical, digital and green supply chains. We offer training events and workshops, and execute supply chain related projects for and on behalf of the on behalf of our membership first, and then on behalf of the wider industry. We also operate 3 industry recognised accreditation schemes, but you can find out more on our website. So that's enough about BIC. Let me just change slides and move on to the next one. So just a little bit about our accessibility series. Bear with me. Yes. So we started this series in July last year, well this year, sorry, and its intention really is to sort of break down accessibility requirements primarily in light of the EAA, but not solely. As you'll see, we've got digital audio on there, which isn't necessarily covered by the EAA, but nonetheless is important to talk about. So we've broken it down into sort of bite-sized topics, and these sessions run every month. Today is the 4th one in our series, and the series will run through to, well, currently scheduled to end in April 25, but I suspect it will run past that. We have a focus on accessibility group at BIC that meets every 4 weeks, and we're constantly reviewing the topics that we have scheduled and adding to the list, as there is a lot to cover. So lots of good stuff to come. Some of the recordings are already available on our YouTube channel, and some of them are currently only available to BIC members on request, so as you can see on the screen there. So what generally tends to happen is that a month or so after each event, the recordings will go onto YouTube, so anybody that wants to, member or not, can have a look. So today, our expert speakers will guide us through the accessibility requirements of AltText for digital books. We'll find out, we're going back to basics a little bit, finding out what actually is AltText, what's its purpose, why is it important, how to do it, how not to do it, common pitfalls to avoid. We'll have a look at different types of scenarios and contexts, and determine when or even if AltText is appropriate or required, and also the impact on workflows. We'll also hear firsthand about the impact of good, bad and absent AltText on readers with accessibility requirements. And finally, we'll also touch very briefly on the implications of AI in this space. So without further ado then, I would like to introduce our first speaker, Huw Alexander, to the virtual stage. Huw is Managing Director at textBOX and is going to start off by giving us an introduction to AltText. What do we mean by AltText? What is it? What are the different types? What are the benefits of good AltText? Are there any useful rules? How to review AltText and how to write meaningful descriptions for different types of images, and a lot more. So I'm going to hand over to you now, and bear with us while we just change screens. So Huw, you should be able to take control now. How's that looking?
I think that worked. Let's have a look.
Excellent.
Yes,
we can see your screen. Yeah.
That's a good start.
But it's not in full screen mode.
It's just having a think. There we go.
Okay.
How about that?
There we are. Brilliant. Thank you.
It was a bit shy. With,
reluctant.
Yeah. Oh, right. Good afternoon to everyone, and thank you so much, Karina, for the invite. I'm going to be covering writing image descriptions, a quick introduction. It's going to be quick. We've got 20 minutes. There are a lot of slides, and as Karina said at the start, the slides will be shared, so don't rush around trying to kind of screenshot or trying to copy down links and stuff. They will all be shared afterwards. So before we kind of kick off, I'll just introduce myself. I'm Huw Alexander. I'm Managing Director of textBOX, and textBOX specialise in Image descriptions. We write alt text for organizations and primarily focusing on publisher content. And also we look at things like accessibility statements. So kind of a broad range, but our focus is on image descriptions, and we work with a range of different publishers across the industry, from children's books through to academic, trade, things like that. So hopefully you'll get an idea of what alt text is, what image description is, how to work with it. We're kind of looking at it from terms of actually doing the alt text, but if you're not actually doing it in the audience, you can actually kind of take down some notes basically and think about how to review alt text. We'll give you some tips on thinking about reviewing alt text that you receive from your vendors. So let's start right at the beginning. What is alt text? So alt text is a short description of the image required to explain the content of the image to a user with low vision. A long description, and sometimes you'll hear these described as extended descriptions, but it's exactly the same thing. So that's a more detailed description that is required if a complex image provides additional information that is not present in the text. So think about a textbook that's got a graph or a diagram or an infographic or something like that, and that's conveying more information than is available actually within the text. So that would require a more detailed description. Getting really detailed now, you don't really kind of need to know this level of detail, but just in case you're interested, the alt tag is where an alt text sits. So the best way to actually think about this is if you're on a website and if you right click on your mouse, you'll come up with a menu. If you choose, I think it's the last one, this is on Chrome, if you choose the last option and choose inspect, it will bring up the kind of HTML code that sits behind that web page, and then you'll be able to see the alt text. You'll see this code. So there's the image source, which is the name of the JPEG or PNG file, and then the alt itself, which is in this case this image description, but it may be this is a lovely black and white cat or whatever it may be for that image. So that's the kind of coding that sits behind for a website and for an EPUB file, exactly the same premise. So you have that coding that sits behind the text and the images. For long descriptions, it's a bit more complex and you've got a bit more choice in terms of how you implement long descriptions or extended descriptions. I've included a link there to the DAISY knowledge base, which has a really great overview of extended descriptions and provides the kind of different alternatives and options you have for providing long descriptions. There's options such as expanding and collapsing the description on the actual page. There's links to the end of the chapter. There's links to an index at the back of the EPUB, and that brings you actually back to the image after you've read that description. So there's a variety of ways to implement long descriptions. One thing to think about when you think about alt text is it's really basic. So when you're writing in the alt text field, you can't use things like bold text, italic text, underlining, small caps, super and subscripts, strike through text, things like that. Double quotes won't be announced. These things won't be announced by the screen reader user or by the screen reader to the user. And things like bulleted lists and structured lists, numbered lists, cannot be used in alt text, mainly because they won't be announced by the screen reader. So the user won't actually be kind of listening to this emphasis that you're placing on certain words or creating lists. So keep it nice and basic. Now the benefits of alt text are essentially that you enable your content to reach your whole audience. You're conveying all of that information. You're not self-censoring. If you think about a textbook, especially now, the pedagogy of content now, it's very much infographics, diagrams. It's wonderful content, but if you don't have alt text and long descriptions conveying that information, say of the graphs or the charts or whatever it may be, some of those readers won't be able to understand or even access that information. So that has a real impact on learning outcomes. So think about it in terms of conveying all the information within your books. For open access publishers, it can enhance the discoverability of the content. If the Google algorithm works based on AltText, so if you've got information that has really good descriptions of your content, it will raise up those results in Google searches so that your discoverability will be enhanced. And that works for all publishers, but especially for open access publishers whose content is actually indexed on the web. And also you're complying with legal requirements. So Karina mentioned earlier the EAA, and we're all thinking about that for June next year. So making sure that you comply with legal requirements by providing AltText within your content. Now, the standards for AltText. So I'm sure everyone thinks that there's a fantastic way that we all have to do this. We all have to provide AltText. There's going to be rules and guidelines for this. So the rules and guidelines are all on this slide in this one sentence. All non-text content that is presented to the user has a text alternative that serves the equivalent purpose. Now that's from the WCAG guidelines for 2.2, and that's it. It just says if you have non-text content, if you have images, you need to describe them. That's the whole guidance, which can be a bit worrying and a bit kind of like daunting for publishers if you're starting out on this process of creating or kind of making more accessible content. It doesn't really tell you what you need to do in very much detail. So this is something I thought about a lot when I was working in publishing, how to go about describing content when you, especially with complex images. I used to work in academic publishing, so it was more kind of graphs and diagrams, and how do you go about it? So here at textBOX, I kind of sat around and thought about this and developed the focused locus approach. And essentially, it's about deconstructing the visual, the image, and then constructing a textual description of it. And you're creating a focus. So if you think about a man sitting under a tree next to a river on a summer's day, that man will be the focus, and the elements around it, the river, the dog, the tree, the sunshine coming down, they're the locus elements. So you're basically breaking down the image into its constituent parts and then creating a pathway through that image and focusing on the main aspect, the man in this case, and then talking about sitting under a tree, there's a river, it's a beautiful day, things like that. So just breaking it down. And you can apply this kind of approach, this method, to all different types of image. So for diagrams and graphs, whatever it may be. We'll give you an example here. So this is the ballad of John and Yoko. This is quite a famous photo taken in 1969. So the alt text for this is John Lennon and Yoko Ono. So they're the focus. John Lennon and Yoko Ono. If you talk about, oh, there's two people in a bed in a hotel room, you're not really conveying all of the information. People are interested, wow, it's John Lennon and Yoko Ono. So make sure that that's the focus, and that's in the first sentence of your alt text or description. So for this one, it's John Lennon and Yoko Ono sit up in bed during the 1969 honeymoon peace protest in the presidential suite of the Amsterdam Hilton Hotel. And in general, that will probably be enough, depending on your content and the context that that image is being used. That will probably be enough, just having the alt text. But here we've got a long description which goes into a bit more detail. So you can see those focus elements, which are highlighted in green and underlined. So Lennon and Ono are smiling and wearing pajamas. They are each holding a white tulip. Lennon has shoulder-length hair parted in the center, wears his trademark wire-rimmed round glasses, and Ono wears her long dark hair down. A guitar lays across the couple's legs, and a tape recorder sits at the foot of the bed. The bed is flanked by large bouquets of flowers, and then behind them, on the floor-to-ceiling windows, you can see out across Amsterdam, and there's two posters that read hairpiece and bedpiece. So those you're breaking it down into that kind of the focus element, which is John Lennon and Yoko Ono, and then providing that detail. You're building up the description and creating a more immersive description for the user. So as I say, in most circumstances, you'll just need the alt text in that case, but sometimes you might need a little bit more detail. So that's just an example of building up that description. The focused locus method has 3 kind of sections really. So there's image analysis, description writing, and quality control. We'll briefly kind of look through these. This is for analysis. Every time we're looking at a image within a book or a diagram, we're thinking, is it decorative? Does it replicate the text? Is there captions? Sometimes publishers provide really fantastic captions, or the author provides really fantastic captions, and you might not need an alt text. So you're going through and questioning at each stage. If it's a simple image providing additional information, then just provide an alt text. But if it's a complex diagram providing additional information, then you should provide a long description. And as I say, these slides are provided so you can have a look at these kind of decision trees at your leisure. Now, writing the description, essentially you're creating a pathway, and there's 2 main elements that I think about when I'm writing description. It's scene setting and then storytelling. So the scene setting is creating an overview. For instance, when you're writing an alt text or for a complex image like a graph, the alt text will be an overview. This is a graph of X and Y, and you provide structure as well. And this is an element that publishers really often miss out on when I'm kind of reviewing alt text. And something when you're reviewing your kind of alt text from your vendors, really have a think about the structure. And when I talk about structure, I mean being able to, or enabling the screen reader user to visualize that content. So if you're talking about a line chart, for instance, it's got an X and a Y axis. I'm thinking about reverse here, so a Y and an X axis. And talk about how many data points there are. So you're creating that structure and enabling that visualization. The reader will know, oh, I'm looking at a line chart. I'm going to think about the 10 data points that are going to be on that line chart. So you're creating that possibility for visualization. And then with the storytelling, you're just telling the story of that image. So the focus element, what's the main subject of that image? And then you're adding the details. So for a graph, the details would be those 10 data points which will be provided. One thing to think about when you're actually describing images is kind of the audience, the purpose, the context, and the structure. So the audience is what level is the audience, and what the kind of language they're using in terms of vocabulary. So I work with some publishers that I'm writing descriptions for 5 and 6-year-olds. And then for other publishers, I'm writing for a kind of university audience. So you've got to kind of think about what audience you're writing for. The purpose of the image, what image or what content is that image trying to convey? What's the key information? What's the context of that image? So a description for an image in one book and the same image in another book may be very different. So you have to kind of think about the relationship between the image and the text. So you have to read the surrounding text around the image to get a kind of idea of how that image is being used. And finally, the structure, so enabling that visualization as we've just talked about. And there's 9 rules that I kind of learned over the years of doing writing alt text and descriptions. So select your focus, that starting point, create structure to enable the visualization, capture the detail, and then create that immersive experience. Thinking about that John Lennon one, we're talking about the guitar, the posters behind him, things like that, just making it a bit more interesting for the user. Use simple punctuation to create natural pauses. For me, I tend to only use commas and full stops to create those natural pauses. Other elements of punctuation tend to be overlooked by screen readers unless you have it at the settings at the highest level, but the standard settings will just kind of blitz past things like parentheses and stuff like that. So you think about writing using simple punctuation. Use descriptive language. I love adjectives. It just makes it a little bit more interesting. Describe what you see and do not interpret. So this actually saves you time in terms of you're not having to explain what the diagram means. You're just actually explaining what's in the diagram. You're not actually interpreting and providing your opinion. So just describe what you see. Create pathways through the image for the user. Adopt the user perspective. Think about what the user actually needs. What information is that image or that diagram conveying, and what do they need to know. So have a think about what adopting the user perspective as you kind of describe your image, what do they need? And then finally, test your accuracy by recreating the image, and we'll touch on that briefly coming up. So quality control, this is the final stage. The mnemonic is picture. So think about, and you don't have to do this for every single image, but think about whether your description is precise, informative, consistent, thorough, useful, relevant, and engaging. And one great way of testing, if you think, oh, I'm not sure about the quality of this description, is just take a blank piece of paper and try and sketch it out by only using that description. It can be quite eye-opening what's missing. So this is an example for reviewing AltText. The figure shows the recommended focus of wellbeing training inputs as 4 elements: psychological, financial, physiological, and sociological, juxtaposed together. Now, juxtaposed together is fantastic. Juxtapose is a fantastic word, but if you're trying to visualize that content, very difficult. This is the actual image. Probably wouldn't have guessed that it looked like that. And this is the AltText. That provides a little bit more kind of structural description. The figure illustrates the recommended focus of wellbeing training inputs. A rectangular matrix is divided into 4 quadrants, etc. Upper left quadrant, lower left, and it just provides a bit more detail, a bit more structure, so you can visualize that content. So quickly, working with different types of content, and we're going to focus on structure and visualization here, so it's not going to be incredible amounts of detail, but just to kind of emphasize how that structure helps the screen reader user. So we're looking here at a flowchart that is about Freddie Mercury and how he expresses himself through his lyrics. So the description for this would be: a flowchart illustrates what Freddie Mercury wants through his lyrics. The flowchart has 3 levels and develops from north to south down the page. Again, creating that structure. Level 1 contains a single box labeled Freddie Mercury. Level 2 contains 2 boxes labeled wants, doesn't want and isn't sure about, and level 3 contains 6 options. So you end up with 6 pathways through this flowchart. So first of all, Freddie Mercury wants to break free, he wants to ride his bicycle, he wants it all now, and he wants to make a supersonic man out of you. So you're creating that structure and then reverting it back into a list, which lists are very user-friendly for screen reader users in a long description. The joy of lists. If you think about any kind of diagram in terms of a bar chart, a line chart, flow chart, it will generally come from data that was originally in something like Excel, and it was originally a list or a table. So you're actually reverting it back into that form. So lists are your friend. This is an example of pie chart. These are the causes of death in Shakespeare's plays. And essentially that came from a list. So what we're going to do is put it back into a list in the actual description. So you'll see that there's 22 causes of death. There are 62 deaths in total. That's managing expectations there. So the reader knows that there's going to be 22 causes of death and there's 62 deaths in total. And then you have a list of 22 items of different causes of death. 30% or 48% of people have been stabbed in Shakespeare's plays, or the death was caused by stabbing. And there's things like buried to the neck and starvation, pursued by a bear. And my favourite one in here is throws oneself away, which is a fantastic way to probably die. Infographics. Now this is a completely huge diagram, bubble chart. I think this is from The Guardian, based on expenditure for government spending. Incredibly detailed. Again, though, it is just a list, a very complex list. This will be a very long description, but again, it's a list, and you'll have ended up with nested lists within that. And nested lists are very screen reader friendly as well. A quick mention of decorative icons. This is another infographic. This is 10 steps to cybersecurity, which is from the government's intelligence website. You'll see on infographics in particular love to use icons. These icons do not need to be described. All you need to do with this one, I think there's 9 or 10 elements or 10 steps to cybersecurity. You're just creating that as a list. You're not describing the individual icons that are just there to make it look a little bit pretty for the infographic. And then just finally, wrapping up, I really recommend each publisher developing their own AltText style guide. All publishers are different. You publish in different areas, different subjects, different levels. Writing an AltText style guide that actually is relevant to your publisher is really critical to make this a success. I really recommend reviewing your content, your different lists, imprints, selecting 10 of the most popular image types, whether it's bar charts or flow charts, depending on, I work for a psychology publisher, 99% of their diagrams are all flowcharts. So having that kind of information about flowcharts really helps the authors. Provide samples and walkthroughs of those popular image types. Evolve your guides over time. These will kind of develop as you have new content and new books. It manages to establish institutional knowledge. People move on, so you'll have trained up people to review your content or write your content, but they may leave the company. But having a style guide creates that institutional knowledge. Make sure you align that style guide with your mission statement and reference that that style guide in your accessibility statement, just to tell your readers that you're really kind of interested in this work and value the accessible experience for your readers. And that is me. So thank you so much for your time. And I think we'll do questions a little bit later. But in the meantime, I will move my sharing to Lindsay and hand back to you, Karina.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Huw. That was really informative. I hadn't even considered that the AltText, and it sounds obvious when you say it, and I think, why didn't I consider that? The audience for the AltText. See what I mean? So that was really interesting to hear, and I just loved your Freddie Mercury and Shakespearean deaths. It really brings it to life.
I always love to get Freddie Mercury into any presentation I do.
Excellent, thank you.
Thanks, Simon.
So I do have questions, but I'm going to just leave those till the end, actually. Just in the interest of time. So thank you so much for that, Huw.
Thank you.
I'm going to hand over now to Lindsay. So Lindsay Sheriff is going to talk to us about some of the practicalities for a publisher getting ready for the EAA with regards to AltText. So as I've already mentioned, Lindsay is Senior Books Data Specialist at Taylor & Francis Group, and she's going to share some insights with regards to how they first tackled and now I imagine continue to handle AltText requirements for both books and journals, particularly given the scale of the task at hand. We'll hear about what the impact has been on workflows both internally and externally, and how frontlist and backlist were and are still being tackled, how they're working with authors to help in that process as well. And then we'll also get a look at their authors contributors toolkit, which they've developed, plus a lot more. So I'm just going to hand straight over to Lindsay. So Lindsay, I don't know if you wanted to, are you on camera?
I think I prefer to just go with the slides for the moment.
Oh, okay. Oh, absolutely fine. Yeah. Okay, so over to you.
Lovely. Thanks very much. Thank you, Huw and Karina. Fantastic presentation, Huw, thank you. My name's Lindsay Sheriff. I work at Taylor & Francis and I'm in the data and content management team. In the next few minutes, I'm going to take you through how we have practically tackled adding alternative text for images to our digital files, as we've evaluated and updated our accessibility production processes and expanded our knowledge in this area. We're really fortunate in Taylor & Francis that we've got a lot of colleagues that are passionate about accessibility, and we've had an established alternative format request service which is operated by an email inbox running for about 15 years now. Taylor & Francis informed an internal accessibility working group back in June 2019 when the European Union published the EAA, so we could oversee our accessibility requirements across the company. The group's remit was to set priorities to start dealing with this huge task and what that would mean with our changes to workflows, both at manuscript stage, production, process, a review of how technology could help, whilst meeting all the challenges of the EAA across different countries, actions for front list, back list, and provision of alt text as well as accessibility. The group included internal stakeholders within TNF and included people from content management, production, technology, legal, commercial, and our editorial teams. And out of these key meetings, key actions for accessibility and alternative text were identified. As a publisher of academic books, we have got over 200,000 books that have been published over decades. And with that in mind, we knew one of the priority tasks was to start with an inventory of what we had. How old was the files and what needed upgrading? We've got a huge volume and, like most publishers, little budget. We started doing a closer review at industry standards to evaluate our product within those guidelines, and also to expand our in-house knowledge, starting with more focused researching in order to provide training for staff and potentially understand and give advice to vendors. A pocket of people undertook more knowledge gathering and in-house training. We used people like the DAISY Consortium, who offer a free self-service study through their learning platform and a really good list of webinars. In addition to that, we used our established partnerships from our ebook distribution channels, like the Royal Institute for the Blind in the UK and Benetech Bookshelf in the US. And we've actually gained quite a lot of knowledge and advice by completing their GCA or Global Certificated Accessible accreditation. We really needed to measure the scale of the problem, as we've got over 180 backlist, 180,000 wishful thinking backlist, plus front list journals, ancillary products. We have to think about external and internal platforms, and also further out, what were our third-party distribution channels? What could they handle? What was e-reader software capable of? Having to think about how our amended files and accessibility data in Onyx updates would also be sent out. So one of the things we did was really have a good look at the standards and legislation. Huw mentioned the WCAG, he mentioned 2.2, which is currently just been published, and keeping up with any changes within the Act, but also gathering guidance from the regulation and acts listed here. And we also look at our EPUB and PDF specifications frequently, and also sort of considering about how we were building everything into those to make the best accessible file that we could. Knowing that the backlist was going to be the biggest challenge, one of the key and immediate actions was to look how to incorporate alt text within the front list, or our new titles. So how could they be born accessible? They would be produced in the current file specification standards, so we're meeting a lot of the accessibility requirements, but how do we include alternative text? Back in April 2020, we started researching on our author-created alt text. We created a trial, and the plan was to engage authors in creating their own image descriptions when they submitted their work. So we took a trial of about 50 authors. It was launched with our editorial team, who worked hand in hand with frontlist production and also the content management teams. Additional internal training for editorial teams was taken place, and then that helped them to support and train their authors. After this training, and over a period of about 6 months, there was a lot of monitoring, checking, quality checking, receiving author feedback and responding to that, giving examples where we were able to, a lot of support and a huge effort by the editorial teams. We were able, from the trial bindings, to produce an author toolkit and lots of resources. And this resulted initially in a landing page website with examples for different disciplines, types of image, And also, it was initially for ebooks, but we've also developed that also for the journal authors and contributors. So the link here goes through to our Routledge.com website. So there's an author information here for accessible content, with a further sort of information on how to write it, little key points to take away, the difference between long descriptions, decorative imagery, how to write it, give examples, and also how to submit that work to us as well. You know, as I said, a similar sort of website is for through Taylor and Francis Online, the Journals Hub. Again, a similar sort of information with the sort of key list that Huw showed you for successful alt text creation, and also how to, for journals, how to submit that work with the manuscript. For example, we've sort of asked here the authors to just provide the alt text with the image so that can be built into the article. We also are encouraging published authors to get in touch with us via the inbox or through their editorial relationships, because we want to help them either write alt text for their pre-published work, for their actually published work, or how we can actually help them to achieve that, and then we send files out. So once we had our authors writing some alt text, we had this agreement with authors that vendor-created alt text could be used if alternative text was not supplied by the author at manuscript stage, or there was partial alt text being delivered by the author. We have a goal at TNF where we flag a book as having 100% alt text. So if it says it has alternative text, all the images do so, and we check that that happens. So focus again was back on the vendors, the typesetters for alt text creation. And initially this was for front list, but also keeping in mind that very big backlist. We assessed vendors' provision, their costs. We evaluated the quality of the alt text, the source of the generation of the alt text. Would they use in-house experts or an outsourced panel? Lots of trials were undertaken, constant conversations to evaluate the standards, and also agreeing what the successful alt text is, almost this style pattern that Huw was talking about, making sure that vendors understood what we considered as successful alt text. So sharing that toolkit and doing lots of development work with them. We agreeing turnaround times with prices within our budget constraints, and we look to see really with our vendors are committed to accessibility as we are. So this is 2021, so we moved on to an established workflow with vendors in 2022, where vendor alt text workflow is incorporated into our production process, with the creation, with alt text creation being carried out during the file creation. It's now included as business as usual and part of our production cost for front list titles. Authors and contributors for books provide the alt text in Excel or Word format. It's part of the manuscript that's delivered to editorial, the handover to production, and then off to the typesetter for file conversion. Content's returned to the production teams, and it's part of our QA quality assurance process now that the alt text is also checked. And as up until recently, we had a secondary check where we ran the EPUB file through a tool, an open source tool called ACE, which is from the DAISY consortium, to ensure that we're meeting our target of 100% alt text across that EPUB file. I was saying until recently because we've now developed a tool that does that in-house, where it basically looks at the content and pulls back that information. We at TNF also have a policy, and we have automated validation on short alt text image descriptions. So we have a policy that they're between 10 and 120 words long. If it's less than 10 words, it gets auto-rejected back to the vendor. If it's 120, it's looked at being flagged as a long description. And then on top of that, we have random checks by our production technology team. So after QA, we accept the file, we would flag it as having alt text included for metadata purposes, or we will return the file for additions or correction back to the vendor. The key lesson we've learned is to just keep checking. So we have a rule of it's not test, 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 it's check, check, check. And we're continually developing and going forward with this process. So the examples here on the screen, the first one is an author-sourced alt text. We have an image, a photograph, and this is in read aloud mode that the screenshot was taken, so we can see the text being highlighted, the short alt text underneath, which is in an EPUB file, and at the source there at the bottom, as well as the caption, is the author's name. So this alt text has come direct from the author and themselves after training and support. On the other side, we have a complex table with a long description. Again, this is from an EPUB where there's a drop-down menu that has the long description that gives an understanding of what that complex table is showing, and additional links to appendices for extra information, which is actually part of that image anyway. I just have a quick note about journals here, even though they're not part of the legislation as yet. Whilst we were developing this workflow for our ebooks, journals team got involved as well. Now we've got 100 journals that request authors to provide alternative text when they submit their manuscripts. You've seen that there's the online hub for Taylor & Francis Online for supporting authors with that. Also, work's been carried out with suppliers to allow authors to add or edit alternative text when they're doing online proofing. And if for journals it's included, it's across the formats of HTML, EPUB, and PDF. One of the things we've been doing is a lot of remediation for EPUB 3. And now, from 2019, published articles have EPUB 3 formats, as well as the PDF on the platform for articles. So these workflows are really making a difference. So we've now got over 9,000 books, ebooks that have been published to date, with 94% of these being being actioned since 2022. You can see we've got some that. So that's showing us where our backlist titles have been remediated on request. In addition to that, our journals team we've got 605 journals with some articles that contain alt text, but over 7,500 articles that do contain alt text. Again, with that 2022 workflow really making a difference. So moving on a little bit to accessibility, again, it's something else that we've been developing across whilst these other workflows have been happening. So looking at accessibility on metadata since sort of summer, really. So it's summer that we've done this, 18 months of work, tested with internal systems. Our Onyx now includes accessibility fields. So we can alert our customers and tell them about what accessibility features there are to help make informed purchasing decisions. You can use the Daisy Ace tool to pull this information and find out the information from an EPUB tool. We've now developed an internal tool that scans the content now and pulls back this data. Vendors might be able to provide you with some of this data as well. We've got an example of how this looks. You can see here there's a screenshot. The top one has the PDF metadata fields. It's coming from the editor list, but also you can see there's an expanded list for EPUB being a more accessible format. I've got an example on the VitalSource platform, how this actually looks in terms of purchasing, the normal description for this book, and then scrolling down to the bottom, there is an accessibility area, which gives you a summary, plus whether this item is screen reader friendly, and an extra pop-up menu, which is really taking that data from the content about why this is accessible and what features are included for accessibility screen readers, for example. So what about our backlist? Well, we've been doing a lot of work on upgrading EPUB standard files, 50,000 to date. We've had been doing this over a long time to EPUB 3 standard. We've just finished converting just under 350 fixed layout to reflowable EPUB 3 files. And we constantly review the EPUB specifications. So 2019, when we started, it was at version 3. And now we're at version 4.3, which is going to be launched next year. Our inventories revealed that 30,000 of our titles are without images. So great, hey, we've only got 150,000 to remediate in our backlist catalogue. We have explored at length over the last 5 years vendor AltText creation. However, the budget really has not allowed us to take this forward in any large capacity. So what we have, due to our budget constraints, our workflow to add alternative tags to backlist titles is via request using our established inbox at request of customers, authors, or also institutions like universities, where they have students that need specific texts. We have an in-house creation workflow and also the vendor creation. So for in-house, we have this on-demand service. We have a few in-house experts that create simple to moderate complexity alt text for images, but any complex images or over 10 images in one ebook get sent to the typesetter for completion. And these typesetters have an alt text writers from different subject areas who are either PhD students or retired editors and authors. And again, it's worth checking where that alt text is coming from. The titles are converted at the same time to the best specification, and then they're distributed out. We are continuing to explore what we're going to do with backlist, and we're working on a goal really for 2030, another 5 years, if you like, to have that 150,000 done. We'll see how that goes. In Taylor & Francis, though, it's not just about the ebooks. We have our inbox also deals with alternative text requests for ancillary content. So, for example, PowerPoints and instructor materials. We've undertaken some in-house training using the DAISY modules platform. For example, they've got a lovely sort of learning advice on how to add alt text to PowerPoints. We are continuing to do lots of audits on our auxiliary content, for example. We've just worked out we've got under 9,000 ISBNs we need to look at, looking at external websites. What e-reader capabilities are there for all these different channels that we sell to and distribute our files via, but also raising awareness in-house of alt text inclusion and accessibility considerations. We've got an image here of a photograph that's been taken from one of our internal article posts on our intranet, where you can see that image descriptions are needed at the bottom of that. We also do some training on accessibility awareness, using things like the simple check accessibility tool in Word, Excel, PowerPoint with Microsoft. So any internal communications or any external files that we're sending have this extra check for accessibility. Simple things like the reading order, is there alternative text, heading structure, is there duplication of heading, for example, in a PowerPoint. So going forward, due to TNF's ever-growing catalogue of ebooks, we are currently exploring artificial intelligence created alt text. However, we the development of the technology it's always changing, and we're yet to commit to using a specific AI tool for image descriptions. And even if we did use a tool for this, then those image descriptions would always be checked by a human before they're published or sent to market. We're starting to do some internal first steps as well, things like categorizing images, whether they're photographs, diagrams, for example, because we believe AI technology uses that. And also looking at what we might have in-house and that we might be able to use our internal systems for AI. But in the meantime, we are continuing to utilise and support industry groups, as this is the best way to stay on top of all these evolving standards and updates. For example, the excellent community of people who are part of the Publisher Accessibility Awareness Group, PAG, they had a conference in September 24, which was extremely useful. And the sort of links will be provided soon. We continue to look at our GCA accreditation with Benetech, information from ABC, the Accessible Books Consortium, and basically taking advantage of any industry offerings we can, including textBOX, wonderful examples on Huw's website, so that we can keep on top of alternative text for the future. I know these slides will be shared at some point, so I've just popped in some resources here and contacts for some things that I've been talking about. Hopefully you found that useful, and obviously ready to take any questions at the end of the presentations. Right, I'm going to hand back now to Karina.
Great, thank you so much, Lindsay. While you're working out the technology there, I have some questions as well, but I'll probably keep them to the end. I think what comes through is the scale of the task.
Yes.
Let me just accept the screen. Can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay. So we have our next speaker slide up there. So Colin will be coming along shortly. But just Lindsay, the sheer scale of it. I mean, do you have a dedicated team of people solely looking at sort of, well, generally accessibility, but then more specifically AltText?
What we established, so we started off with not a dedicated team. Over the years, we've had pockets of people that have been very enthusiastic in different teams, and brought that group together to work through that. We were lucky to take on a head of accessibility at the sort of end of that vendor AltText workflow, and also now we've just taken earlier this year we've got on a manager for accessibility. We also have a production technology specialist who look. But again, very small teams of work, and a lot of this we've tried to build in as business as usual. Yeah. Because just like you said, the huge volume, that 150,000 is not going to go away, and it's just constantly working on solutions to that, and we keep looking at costs for going forward, just exploring to see what we can do. But we have about 3 people that we would say that can write AltText, as you mentioned, for those in-demand titles. Yeah. But that's not their specific job. It's an add-on to whatever else they're doing at the time. So yes, yeah, we can see that might be a need in the future.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, and just the other thing that came through was the importance of checking. Sort of, no disrespect to vendors at all, but you do still need to check the work and make sure that they are familiar with your, in your case, a toolkit or a style guide, etc., because I imagine they'll be working for, multiple clients. It's important to keep track of what they're doing as well. So and I did like your optimism at the beginning when you talked about 180 titles.
Which we were, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
But we will get there.
Yeah. It's a mammoth task, isn't it? So not to be underestimated, but and also really useful to see a live example of the accessibility metadata there on the screen. I thought that was really helpful, particularly how it would display on, how it displays on the website, what users will actually see. I thought that was really helpful. So thank you so much for that.
You're welcome.
I'm going to hand over now to Colin Shales, who's coming along to talk to us today about the real world impact of all of this, and the importance of providing optimum alt text in digital content, and also what it means to him personally in terms of reading experience, and why it shouldn't, well, hopefully shouldn't be an afterthought. Colin is Sight Loss Advisor, Digital Skills, UK Sight Loss Advice Service at the Royal National Institute of Blind People. So over to you, Colin.
Thank you, Karina. First of all, can everyone hear and see me?
Yes, I can see you.
So just as long as I'm in frame. Yeah, thank you very much. So yeah, I've been kindly asked here today just to give a little bit of context and personal experience, both professionally and in a personal sense, of how I use alt text and the technologies that I use in order to detect them. And yeah, I'd like to speak for a few moments if I can, just to highlight some of those and bolster the information that Huw and Lindsay spoke of. Really interesting segments, by the way. I've certainly taken a lot from that myself and would certainly like to relay some of that to the people we speak with. So yeah, as Karina said, my name's Colin Shales. So I am a digital skills advisor for the sight loss advice team at the Royal National Institute of Blind People. That's my current role at the moment. What we do there is to support customers and clients with assistive technologies and accessibility within mainstream devices. But it could be anything technology related or digital skills. And one of those aspects is the support for people to access digital content, which is really important to a lot of people for many reasons, probably a lot more than what we have time today here to highlight. But also from my personal experience. So I currently, I experienced sight loss myself. I'm actually registered severely sight impaired or blind. I have a condition called Stargardt's disease, which is a macular degeneration. And what that means for me is that I have no central vision in either eye. So reading text and seeing images is something that's very difficult for me, even while I have, a degree of usable vision in order to, navigate around in my surroundings. Accessing digital content can, it's one step away from not being accessible without the use of these assistive technologies. So I'll go into some of those technologies that I use and some examples. So yeah, some of the customers that we support have an expectation of how alt text works. They may be a screen reader user, and just to highlight what a screen reader is for anyone who's not sure, it's an assistive software that sits on top of a device, whether that's mainstream like your Windows or Mac computer, or it could be any of your smartphones, your Android devices and iPhones have a screen reader built into them as well without having to install additional software. So these allow us to navigate any digital content, whether that's images, text, or controls on a screen. So not just in books, but apps and on the web as well. I've been a screen reader user now for over 25 years. And historically, in the beginning, I had to rely a lot on my remaining vision to read images. So the alt text has been around for many years, but it wasn't widely adopted or used or even understood initially. So I had to rely on others or the remaining vision I had to identify images. So I'm using a screen reader today, in fact, to read my notes, which I hastily put together just before this session. so do bear with me. So there is that perception that alt text, or the detection of text in content, is actually built into the screen reader itself. Now, it is to a degree, but what we do is to make people aware, both the people that use the technology and also the content providers, that they have, you know, an obligation in a way to actually provide these alt text examples for content, and that the screen reader, although works with the web accessible, the web content accessible guidelines, is actually there to detect these objects and images, and doesn't really, its first purpose isn't really to actually create those image descriptions, but screen reader companies have included some technologies in order to do that, and I'll mention some of those examples shortly. So images itself in apps and on the web. Thinking about the audience, I mean, I completely, even as a visually impaired person, I completely understand why we have images, not just for decorative, but for informational infographics. It's really important to make the presentation of a piece of content, you know, nice to view, and not just have a bulk of text. So I completely understand there. But when I think about how I want to interact with content, in the first instance, before we even consider images and how they're tagged, for best practices, it's good to think about the layout of your document or your book or your web page or your app, and think about how the screen reader user interacts with that page. So I'll describe why that's the case shortly, but I'm going to talk a little bit about my experiences of some of these things that we've discussed. So the crucial use of longer descriptions for technical diagrams and data sets. So prior to my role at RNIB, I actually worked for a screen reader company in the UK as a software test analyst. One of the things we did was to test the accessibility of websites. So we came across some of these examples that I'll mention today. But as a professional in that role, it was really important to the work I did and to the others that received the content I produced was accessible and had those tags in. So we used a lot of decision tables, the bubble charts that we saw earlier, and things like, as mentioned, decision tables, state diagrams as well. So it was important to get an idea of how the software we were developing was branched and laid out. And it was partly my job to bring up ways to actually find an alternative method to relay that information. We had to have it graphical because of the audience, which we have to think about. It's inclusive, so both visual and non-visual users of that content. But as most of the testers that I worked with were also visually impaired, it was important that we relayed that information. So we used the extended descriptions, and in some cases we did away with the images altogether and opted for things like state tables. So I think we saw an example of that in today's session, where information is laid out in a table, like the Shakespeare example, for example. So knowing when to use and not use information or descriptions in images is key for the reasons that we mentioned today. So it was also important that we shouldn't really embed text within images as well. So this is another thing that cropped up quite a lot. Things like charts and stuff that were created from Excel and that are posted or copied into a document were just embedded as an image. Okay, so some of the time that wouldn't be described, and usually the image is lesser quality. The text that's taken almost like a photo or a screenshot isn't really viewable visually either. So where possible, we always tended to encourage people not to embed images and then opt for a clear image of a chart with the extended description or even a caption underneath. So as one of the guys mentioned today, if the information is large, a caption may do the same job there. So the overuse of images and opting for better body text or captions, that's what I mentioned before. Sometimes it's good to have those captions discuss the image, describe the image. So when we think about screen reading, for someone who has no visual acuity at all and relies on a screen reader, it's like looking through a letterbox. That's the way I describe it. You only have one piece of information described to you at any one time. So with a visual reader, you can skim read, you can, omit information that you don't want to read, or you determine as not being necessary at that particular time. But with a screen reader user, especially with a piece of content that isn't familiar to them, you're going to be going through that from top to bottom, reading one line at a time or one element at a time. So it's really important not to put extraneous information into a document and multiple examples of the same description. And that's the same for Braille users as well. So anyone's not familiar with a refreshable Braille display, that attaches to a hardware device like your computer or phone, and it refreshes the Braille through a set of pins. And again, that only allows the user to read one line at a time, and it's a way to read tactily without using speech. So your alt tags and text is still detected by Braille users as well. So when we want a nice clean document, it's not just about not including those images that aren't necessary, but it's making sure the order of text and the associated image is in a particular navigation order. And this applies to things like PDFs quite a lot, where if the author hasn't tagged the document correctly, it will appear all over the place. So the screen reader may jump from the top to the middle to the bottom and then back up again. And sometimes the image doesn't get described until later on within that document. So it's important to consider the order of the descriptions versus the text that's then discussing the topic. So if the image is not necessary to the narrative of the to the content, then don't include it, or opt for a description instead as a caption. So just an example of some damaging use of alt tags where assumptions were made. So yeah, just to reiterate, it's really important to check thoroughly the descriptions you're using. Sorry, bear with me 1 second. So checking, not overusing, and making sure that's precise. So I'm going to use an example that I actually came across when testing a website. So I'm going to quote the example, which I call the Asian woman and white man example. Now, the caption said, a white man and an Asian woman discuss their life struggles. The white man looks frustrated, and the Asian woman is gesticulating with her hands. They are both drinking cups of tea and eating biscuits whilst discussing the technology they use. Okay, so what's wrong with that particular description? For a start, it's not written particularly well, and perhaps a little bit wordy. But if we consider some of the things we discussed earlier, so was it precise? Well, no. So the man in the image was actually a woman. The woman was actually Spanish, not Asian. So it was a misconception there. Was it decorative? Yes, the image was decorative because it didn't have any relation to the topic being discussed. Was it consistent? Well, the image, or a similar image with the same characters, was used elsewhere in the website. So the description for this other image was different. It differed again from the one that I just mentioned, where it actually referred to the woman as being Spanish rather than Asian. Was it thorough? No, because the person that actually created the description, it wasn't actually generated by AI at all. This was a few years ago now, and it was actually created by a sighted person for the use of that website. And did it have any value? Was it relevant? Not really. Again, the topic being discussed was actually events at a sight loss charity. So had nothing to do with technology or even the assumption of what the characters were actually discussing. And was it engaging? Well, it was engaging to myself as a tester who had to highlight the problem with that particular alt tag. Some other examples include that I came across offensive and derogatory use of alt tags. So in the past, a lot of content providers would use the alt tag section to actually label their images, not thinking that anyone would actually detect this with a screen reader or even understanding what that was about. So we came across a lot of offensive descriptions of characters and other items in pictures. So it's just a case of being respectful and understanding what the object is being viewed. I also saw examples of concealed advertising in alt tags where, for example, there was limitations or breach of the platforms being used. So advertising was mentioned, and also the use of tags to extend the message where there was a limit on posts, perhaps in popular platforms where you had a character limit and they were used to extend that text. So where text has describe the importance of an image, such as a painting. So I've got another example here. Really good web page, an article created about a blind painter who painted something very detailed, and it was a lovely article about the styles they used and how they painted it, the methods they used. But when it came to the tag, there was very little in the description at all. It was something like a description of a painting. This painting is a landscape, but it didn't describe the brush strokes. It didn't describe the important attributes of the painting. What was the texture of the painting, and was that important to the person? Well, in this case, I think it was, because it was quite crucial that the information that painting was described in that particular example. So again, other examples of where too much unnecessary information is being given in the alt tag, but the caption is being used or even repeated. So I think there was a misconception of alt text to be included in a description and then also replicated in the caption and then also in the body of the text. And I came across one example where there was a repeat of all three. So again, as a screen reader user, when you're going through an image and then the caption and then the text, it's actually extraneous information, adding, a longer time for the screen reader user to actually get through that content and not knowing when to skip unnecessary information. So just wanted to mention some alternative workarounds I've had in the past to examples where alt tags have not been incorporated or where they've failed to be used. So I mentioned that I'm a screen reader user. I use the JAWS screen reader currently. I have used many different types and they all have different features, but what they've done is to incorporate some alternative ways to get image descriptions. One of those is the JAWS Picture Smart. So this is actually an AI-based feature they've recently added and gives you really great detailed descriptions of the images it sees on the screen. That could be anything on the screen. And then it also gives you the ability to ask further questions about that image. So you can actually get AI conversational style information in greater detail about that image. Again, JAWS also includes an OCR feature. So if you do encounter an embedded text in an image, and the screen reader can do a fairly good job at detecting this, it's not ideal to use because it's, again, another step that's needed in order to detect that image. Web browsers also include image detection as well. So Google include image detection within the Chrome browser. And this can be turned on and adds more information where an alt tag isn't used. And another one that I want to share with you that I found recently quite interesting is actually providing other ways other than text and graphics to relay information about a chart. So this will be audiographs, which some of you may have heard of. Apple do a really good job at using audiographs, and what it is an audio sound or tone that will indicate the dips and troughs, or is it troughs and dips of a chart, to give you an idea, or the blind user an idea of how that chart looks within the axes. I'm going to show you an example of that now, actually, just so you can hear what that sounds like. I hope you're able to hear that over the microphone. We'll see if this works. So I'm using an iPhone today, and I'm using the weather app, which has a chart on it for the weather. I think it might be precipitation. I'm not entirely sure. I'm just going to play the audiograph for you now. Okay, I'm going to play that now. Okay, so you may have heard that. I don't think it was suppressed by the by this
I
chat.
don't think it didn't really come across. I don't think
It didn't really come across. I'm going to try one more time, just
right.
I think it's probably been suppressed. Complete. Was you able to hear that at all?
Oh, we got something at the end, right at the end, very quickly, snippet of something, but no.
Yeah, unfortunately, I suspect the webinar software using actually suppresses background noises, and it's considered a background noise. But what we would have heard was a high-pitched tone, which moves in segments, and it goes higher pitch to lower pitch, and that indicates where a chart dips and peaks for information like that. So what does AltText mean to me? Well, I mean, it's a tool. It's an additional tool with many other methods and tools in a larger toolbox. It's really important because it actually empowers me to read content. It empowers me to get the full picture and everything that the content provider desires the reader to have. So it's really crucial to have those descriptions where possible, but also to get that balance right and know when not to use descriptions and how to use them correctly. So it's quite a crucial thing for me as a screen reader user. These are just my experiences, but in the UK, there are 2 million or over 2 million blind and partially sighted people with varying degrees of sight loss, some of which are screen reader users and other assistive technology users. So again, the audience potentially is quite large for the need of audio descriptions and text tagging as well. And that number doesn't include those with sensory impairments or neurodiversities, or even other print impairments as well. So there's other considerations there as well. That's it from me today. I do have some contacts which I can provide at the end of the session, just if anyone wants to continue a conversation regarding technology with us at the RNIB. Would you like that information now, Karina, or in a bit?
Sorry, what was that? I didn't catch that.
Sorry, would you like that information, those contacts now?
No, we can supply them in the follow-up email to.
No problem. That's fine.
Yeah, that would be really helpful. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for letting me speak today.
No, well, thank you for coming along at such short notice. Absolutely fantastic. So, yeah, really interesting. I think I've just made some notes as you've been talking, and just sort of very quickly, what came across to me was, apart from the fact that AltText is essential, and it's essential that it's used or provided in an optimal way, some of the key hints and tips that I took from you were no extraneous information, avoid duplication, take care with navigation order of descriptions in relation to the text, and importance of tagging. Precision is key. Accuracy is key. You gave the example of the Spanish woman, not an Asian woman, and consistency. So you know, with the same image, if you're saying the woman is Asian incorrectly, as it transpired, in one area of your book, you should have the same, in theory, the same description later on. Value to the reader, what's the value of the alt text? Are they gaining anything from it? Relevance to content, and is it engaging? And then to avoid advertising and any abusive or derogatory terms. So that they're the sort of the quick whistle stop tips that I picked out there. So thank you for that, really appreciate it.
That's okay, thank you.
So now I'm going to invite all the rest of our speakers to put their cameras on. We've only got a few minutes for questions. So what I will ask them is, are they able to stay on a little bit longer while we go through, because we've had quite a few questions, as you would probably imagine. So let's go and have a look. Oh, and just while I'm doing that, I'm going to try and do a quick poll on the screen. Bear with me. So this is just a very quick thing. It's not scientific in any way, shape or form, but it's just to find out from our audience the readiness with regards to alt text. So let me just launch that now. I think it will dominate your screens for a few seconds. Is it coming up?
Yeah.
There we go. Excellent. So you don't have to fill it in. Yes, it's not an obligation, but it would be really great if you can just, I'll leave that there for a few minutes while we talk about some questions, and then we'll have a quick look at the results. So let's just see, we've had quite a few questions, so pull them out. So there's a lot of questions, as you would expect, about guidelines. Are there any guidelines for using alt text and or for using AI? Lindsay, you showed us some of your own sort of guidelines that Taylor and Francis have created, and Huw, you talked about the importance of creating your own in-house style guides. Is there anything else other than that you think would be useful for our attendees to know about in that regard?
Well, we did a lot of research, but it is using the people who are the experts, really. So you could type in what is good alt text into your web browser and get a lot of different information back. But going to those industries as organisations who are the experts is what we did. When we were gathering, we don't call it style guide, but our toolkit for success that we would share. So we did look at textBOX and what they were providing in terms of information on the website. As we mentioned, they are an IB. Daisy have got a webinar on alt text, for example, if you go onto their webinar series on their consortium website. And then just looking at those industry standards as well, that's what we did to come up with that toolbox. And then we obviously got the feedback from the people who were writing it, being the authors and the contributors during that 6-month trial. So people can access our website to have a look at what we put together. But it was going to the experts that knew what they were talking about for us anyway, to start off with that sort of checklist, if you like, or information that we would talk to our vendors about when we're checking the quality of the alt text.
Okay, great. Huw, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, as I said in my session, it does create kind of confusion. That there is a lack of standards, but creating your kind of style guide is, I would say, essential. Standards are great, but kind of it's such a broad spectrum of content in the publishing industry that creating a standard that covers them all is really difficult. So if you're kind of a children's publisher, do you really need to know about how to describe maps or anatomy or something like that? So it's creating that style guide kind of bespoke for your own publisher is really key. So you've got that kind of institutional knowledge that you can refer back to a reference guide. Oh, how do I describe bar chart or a pie chart or whatever it may be. Very useful that you can pass on to your authors or onto your vendors or for your in-house staff as well in the review process. But there, for guidance, I'd recommend, I think I noticed it in Lindsay's talk as well. She mentioned the PIT website, part of the Diagram Centre at Benetech. That's got some really good pointers there. But again, I think as Lindsay says, it's working with kind of experts in the field and designing your own bespoke guidelines for your content and making sure that that is relevant to you. Not the easiest task. I'm not saying this is simple, but really valuable for publishers going forward. And you'll find that it develops over time as you kind of have new content, new books, new imprints, whatever it may be. So it will be a long-term project.
Okay, thank you. Another question's come in. How do you ensure clarification when a word in sound has a different spelling and a different meaning? So, for example, piece and piece. So, war and peace or piece of cake. Do you just spell them out, or how do you tackle that?
It's a really interesting question, actually. Probably Colin would be the expert.
I think it's, you may work that out from the context of the description. I mean, it's a common thing with screen reader users who don't use Braille technology to get the spelling of. It's not to say that screen readers can't spell that text out, but I think you'll work out the difference in spelling based on the context of the description. But you can have, I'm not entirely sure if the screen reader can go through word by word. That's the thing about descriptions. Sometimes if it's embedded, they are read out all in one go. So it is a tricky one.
It's something well worth thinking about in terms of things like acronyms. So you can write down NASA and people will understand that, but for others, I'd recommend writing out the actual letters so that it's actually read out correctly by the BBC with spaces in between, for instance, because there can be confusion there, and things like abbreviations. If you think about writing doctor, DR, that could be Acacia Drive as well. So it's very good to kind of be careful with that abbreviations and write things out in full, just to make sure that there's no ambiguity.
And best to use sparingly use punctuation as well. So that can change the meaning of text as well, especially when screen read.
And it's also trying different e-readers, I would imagine, as well. We're producing files to a certain specification and writing the AltText hopefully the best way we can. But then it's also dependent on the platform or the e-reader technology about how that interprets that actual the tagging and the navigation and the structure of the file. So if you're not happy with one e-reader, maybe try another. Just to help with the clarity of what's being read out.
Okay, thank you. I'll just do one more question, I think. Once the alt text has been created, where's the best place to save it? Should it be saved in the image's metadata or in the InDesign document or somewhere else? Any advice would be great. Thank you. I think this is about the physicality of where does it sit as a file.
I mean, it depends on the platform being used, I suppose. If it's social media, you're prompted to put that in a particular place. If it's in a Microsoft document, then again, I think you'll be prompted with the tag. So I'm not sure about the specific with regards to metadata. It's probably more book content.
It's in there. Let Huw, you probably explain it better.
because I work with various different publishers, every publisher has a different approach to this kind of deliverables in terms of the alt text that I provide to them. Sometimes I'm providing it with thumbnails of the actual image within a Excel sheet. Some publishers have each image has a code for that particular image, which relates to the actual book. So then the code gets transferred with the alt text. So there's a whole range of kind of administration and bureaucracy in the background that's kind of making sure that all the alt text is referenced to the right images within the book. But it really does depend on the publisher workflow and what you want back from your authors or from your vendors. So it's incredibly important to archive all this, because as Lindsay's been talking about, and they've been shifting from EPUB 2 to EPUB 3 and in the future move to EPUB 4. You don't want to then go back to the vendor and have to get all new alt text. If you can have an archive of the original alt text from the EPUB 3 file, it will be, and you have the same content, then you can reuse that alt text. So you're creating a bank of alt text that you can reuse, and especially if you repurpose content. So that alt text could be used in the book, it could be used in the ancillary materials, the PowerPoints, so whatever it may be. So having a really kind of central hub which kind of archives all that content, really critical. And also with new editions, if you've got a new edition, it might have 80% of the photos may be the same, or the images might be the same, so you can reuse them, and it saves on that cost really, instead of paying for all again.
Okay, thank you. We've had a question, and I don't know, or don't think we're going to have too much time to talk about it, but I think it's important. Could you, and this is to you, Huw, could you please speak to the specifics of alt text for children's picture books, and how, if at all, alt text might differ in a fiction context compared to the more commonly discussed non-fiction context?
Now, this is one of my favourite things in the world to do. It's children's books, and you have to think about the audience and actually read the book, which is a bit easier with children's books because there's less text rather than reading a 1,000-page physics book. But really kind of think about the author's voice and kind of echo that voice in your text, and use similar language, similar words. Think about the vocab that child may have. If you're thinking about 5 or 6 year olds, it's going to be different from a kind of teen reader or an adult reader. But make sure that you kind of make it descriptive and immersive and fun, to be honest, with children's books. Make sure that you're conveying that information. I did a wonderful Danish publisher's book recently, which is just really lovely book. It was about matches, actually. It was about the story of Christmas through a book of matches, and just kind of bringing that to life. And I was thinking about it at the time, how am I going to do this? But it was actually wonderful, and it's just something that really gets. I think it's really important to kind of make sure that these pictures come to life, because they're so important. The kids are sitting there reading these books with their parents. And the pictures are something that really bring these books to life. And if you miss out on that, you've just got the text, it's a bit of a shame. So making it fun, you think about the kind of Roald Dahl books or something, Quentin Blake's wonderful illustrations through them, they make those books even better. So missing out on that is such a shame. So again, think about the author's voice. And really kind of bring those kind of characters or whoever it may be to life. I did another book about the zoo, and it was kind of a tour of the whole zoo, an actual zoo, and it just makes it possible for someone to kind of with low vision or who is blind to actually experience it and be able to ask questions if they going around the zoo with their parents or something. It's like, they're telling me this about the alt text. Where can we go and see this? It creates a level playing field. It's just so important to make sure that those pictures are present for everyone.
Yeah, that's key, isn't it? The level playing field. And I think as well, bearing in mind that it might be the child that has accessibility needs, but it may also be the parent that has the accessibility needs that wants to read a picture book with their child, or it could be both that have those requirements as well. So yeah, really, really important. I've got one very last question, and it should be a yes or no answer, hopefully, and then we'll have to close. And I'll share the results of the poll as well. Should we be avoiding subjective emotive terms? So, for example, you know, there's a picture of a lovely day or tasty food or beautiful painting or beautiful people or whatever, because that's an opinion, isn't it? Should that be avoided, or should it remain factual? What are your thoughts?
I tend to include that. I tend to include it's a beautiful day or it's a sunny day or kind of, well, that to a certain extent is factual, but it just creates a bit more immersion for the user. It's again, it's going to be based by case basis, I think, in terms of the context of that image, but making it as immersive as possible, I think, is really key. I'm not sure that was a yes or no answer, but
yeah. I mean, Colin, what do you think about that sort of opinion in the text about, you know, because a lovely day for somebody might not be a lovely day for somebody else. Now, if the sun is shining, that's a fact. But if is that lovely?
I mean, it says a lot about the person if a sunny day isn't a lovely spectre for for someone. But I think I would tend to include those. It's atmospherics. It's getting a sense of the environment. And AI is really good at doing this. So when you have AI describing a scene around you, it tends to put a positive spin. You know, it could take a picture of my living room, which is messy, and say it's a warm, inviting environment. So, you know, just based on the lighting. So it's a difficult one, but I think on the side of yes to include that information.
All right, brilliant. Thank you. We're going to have to leave the questions there, I'm afraid. Before we go, I just wanted to share the poll results. Let me just see if I can share that. I've not shared them before, so bear with me. Is that coming up?
Yeah.
That's good.
Excellent. Okay, so the majority of people have a plan, but only their key titles will be ready in time. And there's a few prefer not to say, not applicables, don't knows. And there's a few, understandably, we won't be ready at all, we're a bit worried. But encouragingly, there's a greater percentage than I had anticipated saying that that all their titles will be ready in time. So that's encouraging. So it's a bit of a mixed bag. But yeah, so thank you to everybody that completed that poll. Let me just remove it now. Our screens. So there we go. So we're at the end of the session. So I'm just going to wrap up, and then we can all go and get some lunch. So I just want to take this opportunity to say a massive thank you to our three speakers today on behalf of everyone here and also on behalf of BIC. So thank you to Huw, Lindsay and Colin for taking time to prepare today and present to us all. I hope you've all found it, I hope our attendees have found it really informative and useful. We'll make the presentation slides available for this event on our website very shortly. You'll also get them in an email that will be sent to you probably next week now. And a recording of this webinar will be sent to you all in the same email, so round about next week. Don't panic if you haven't received it today or tomorrow, but it will be on its way to you. We'll also post this to the BIC YouTube channel in about a month's time, and if you're signed up to our mailing list, you'll be notified of this and also the other accessibility webinars that we've got coming up. Finally, to you, our attendees, I'd like to say a massive thank you for joining us today, especially those of you that are still on, because I appreciate we are 15 minutes over time. So thank you for that. Please do stay in touch. You can find out more about what we do via our website, and you can also stay in touch with everything, not just our webinars, but everything else we're doing by joining our mailing list if you would like to do that. So hope to see you at another BIC event in the future. In the meantime, take care and hope to see you soon. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.